This week on the Wellness Empowerment Project, we speak with Stefan Glazer from Navigating Neurodivergence. We talk about all the things like what exactly is neurodivergence? If you think that you may have it, where do you start? How do you get diagnosed? And then what are some things that you can do to help yourself not only manage symptoms, but thrive in your life?
Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health. Join us as we try out new things, or as we call it, weird shit, and have some fun along the way.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, whenever you are listening to us today. Today, we are welcoming Mr. Stefan Glazer. After a lifetime of constant battles, he was finally diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 39. Even though this turned his world upside down, it was at this moment it became clear why there was such a struggle with concepts that others found simple, such as talking to therapists, note-taking, list-making, and even meditation practices. The neurodivergent brain functions differently, and he's here to share with us the tools that worked for him in forming important habits into his everyday life. These habits helped him to relieve stress and frustration, not just for him, but for others that also have some sort of neurodiversity. So much so that he wrote a book about it titled Tools for Navigating Neurodivergence. And he supports others through education on this topic through his own podcast and his blog. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you for the warm welcome. It's great to be here. I'm excited for our conversation today.
I have to say, the first question I wanted to dive into, just to give a baseline, is can you tell people what is neurodivergent? Because I feel like that's a term that has popped up in the last couple of years, and people talk about it, but without any real clarity of what is the meaning of it.
Yeah, I always love that question because a lot of people look at it and go, oh, neurodivergence, that sounds serious. And yeah, I guess it is, but it's not a medical term. I always tell people that. It's not a medical term. It's an umbrella term for all the neurological disorders that fall underneath it. So you have ADHD, like I have, that's under there, but you have things like OCD, ASD, like autism spectrum disorder. You can go down the list of every little DYS dysfunction, like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. There's hundreds there, and they all fall under this umbrella. And it just makes it easier saying neurodivergent instead of saying people with 1, 2, 3, 4, and listing out 100 different types of neurological conditions. So that's why the term really became popular, is because it made it easier to, hey, this is everyone in this spectrum of neurological conditions.
Hi, Stefan. So nice to have you here with us. Thank you for explaining that. That was something that I really wanted to understand a little bit more. Coming from the healthcare perspective, it helps to know the difference between a medical term and what I would call a layperson's term as to how we are, I don't want to say classifying people, but is there any type of classification with neurodivergence since it is such a broad spectrum, or is it just a simple umbrella?
I say it's more of a simple umbrella term just because the medical classification comes from with the umbrella. So it's just a simple, I would say layperson term, even though it is a tongue twister sometimes.
Do you think that neurodivergence has become more prevalent in the last 10 years, 20 years? Or do you think that we are just recognizing it more and starting to learn more about it?
I honestly think that it is something that's always been there, but with the tools and the medical advances, we have been able to actually find it more prevalent now because we can see the symptoms and we understand the differences. There are better classifications for everything. I honestly think it's been there for a while.
Stefan, I know you mentioned in your bio too that you struggled your whole life with this, and it didn't really all click and become clear until you were 39 years old. What do you think was the first moment that you can recall that you realized that your brain functioned differently or that you had to function differently to succeed?
I think for that, it's a common thread with a lot of neurodivergent people is we didn't realize until our diagnosis. That was the light bulb moment, the aha moment was we had our diagnosis and all of a sudden everything changed.
How did that change for you?
When I had the diagnosis, at first there was a lot of, I would say, frustration or anger even, but then it turned into, okay, 39 years of struggling is now going to be followed by the rest of my lifetime understanding how my mind works.
I could see how that would be a relief in some ways, as well as so angering because of working so hard against yourself, right?
Yeah, I felt like it was a constant struggle to to really get through that. Within the first few months of my diagnosis, there was a lot of issues dealing with anger and like, how did no one see this in my life? How did no one see the red flags? But working through that with a therapist and working through that just with my wife and researching and understanding, everything became a lot clearer and became a relief. It was like a huge weight was off my shoulders now that I started understanding what having ADHD was.
What were some of the first steps that you started to take to really help manage some of your difficulties?
For me, the big first steps was research. With a lot of ADHD people, we always have a hyper focus on certain things we love. I love researching. We got a bunch of books. We started reading a bunch of articles, both medical articles and just blogs, and really dove deep into what works, what helps, because there might not be a cure for neurological disorders, but there are a lot of tools that can help you strive and live with it. The very first thing that I really glommed onto was Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And that's how I got into meditation. The simple change game that he has, which every time I would have these weird feelings from my emotional dysregulation or my rejection sensitive dysphoria, anytime anything would start coming up from that, I would mentally say change or sometimes say change out loud and literally change how I felt to break those patterns. And that was my first real step into, okay, this is a tool I'm going to be using my entire life.
Yeah, I'm a huge Joe Dispenza fan. And I think that was a great example you used of how you were researching anything and everything, and you weren't giving yourself a narrow focus per se.
Yeah.
It also brought me back to you weren't diagnosed till you were 39. What happened at that point, or what switch do you think that you finally got a diagnosis? Were you searching for it? Did it just stumble upon it?
I had a nervous breakdown, as a lot of people in my case with later in life diagnoses, they tend to have. I was getting through life, doing things a certain way, but it was a struggle. It was always like I was burning the candle at both ends on whatever I was doing. I was working twice, three times, four times as hard to get the same thing done that a neurotypical person was doing. But in my head, I thought everyone struggled like this. But it got to a point where it became too much and I couldn't grasp it anymore. I was losing control of like my business, my personal, like interpersonal friendships, and even my relationship with my wife. Everything was super strained. Then there was a day where I just couldn't anymore and it just broke down. And my wife even said, obviously, there's something going on. Let's find out. I went to my doctor and started talking to him, and we started with a self assessment. Then he sent me off to a psychiatrist to actually get the diagnosis done, which, side note, is such a, it's not a joke, but it is a cruel joke for those with, like me, with severe and attentive ADHD. The process to get your diagnosis and the testing is horrendous. It was 6 hours of my life. I wish I could get back.
That sounds a lot more intense than I really understood. Not being in that field, not realizing that it would take 6 hours to really get to narrow down to what your issue is, but also what a great experience that somebody took that time and that focus to really dive into what was going on with you to figure out the right diagnosis.
Yeah. When I was doing the testing, because a lot of the testing was three different types, but the one was a lot of questions. And the questions were similar but different. And there were over 500 of them. It was like 10 questions just repeated different ways. That was very frustrating. But then there was an auditory test as well, visual and auditory test. It was in that within the first few seconds that I didn't know it was wrong, but he knew what was wrong as he was watching me go through this, trying to work my way through this test. When all the data came back and he was showing me on a graph, he goes, "This is a neurotypical person, and here's yours." I was like, "Where are those bars?" Because I saw a few bars were missing on my chart. He goes, "That's for attention. You scored a 12." And I was like, "Oh, wow." I was like, "It must have been what, out of 20 or?" He's no, out of 100. This is a 1 to 100 graph. And you average anywhere from 8 to 15 on the attention portion. So you have a severe inattentive ADHD. You can't do things that are not really in your scope. He didn't mean that in, oh, you can't do anything. I can do anything. But if I don't have the slightest interest in it, my brain is just going to shut off and go off and do something else.
Did your doctor talk to you about any physical reasons as to why you may struggle or a divergent person would struggle versus a neurotypical person?
It comes down to what a lot of it is the problem we have with our dopamine production, meaning that we have almost none. If something is not interesting or not picking that interest or giving us some form of dopamine release, our mind is going to find ways to get it. And when we do get it, we attach ourselves to it. That's why there's a lot of, in the neurodivergent community, there's a lot of people that do have addiction problems and they have very bad impulse control because they're doing things that feed them dopamine. Obviously, the higher the risk, the higher the dopamine. People might drive erratically or do things that are possibly that will cause them bodily harm. So that's the route that they go to get their dopamine fix. That's something that he told me is that's a big indicator of how your mind is working.
Were there any recommendations on ways that you can naturally increase your dopamine?
Right away, no. That was the scary thing is he really didn't have those tools for me. Those were tools that I discovered on my own and some of them that I had already been doing. I always tell people that I live life by a to-do list because it is an artificial way for me to create dopamine. I get a small dopamine hit by completing things on my to-do list. And it's not an elaborate to-do list. Sometimes there's only 3 or 4 things on it, but when I get those tasks done, it creates that feeling where I'm like, "Great, accomplished something. I can move forward. I'm building towards something." It's something that neurodivergent people don't normally get to experience.
So you lived most of your life thinking your struggle was normal until we just couldn't bear it anymore. You reached out for help. You got this diagnosis. It obviously came with a lot of anger, frustration, and probably a little bit of helplessness too, especially when it wasn't this cookie platter of being like, and we fix it just by doing this. Guess that's when you start to dive into all different options.
Yeah, I really started to explore anything and everything I could to really combat the feelings I was having. Because it's not good being angry all the time. It's not good to feel hopeless or helpless. That's something that you want to avoid in life. So, meditation ended up being that first tool in being mindful meditation that all gets rolled into a ball. But that's when I started talking to other people that have been experiencing issues, and some were medicated, some were not. They were telling me that it's not just meditation, but there are other things you can do. And that's when I started getting into breath work. I didn't even understand why at first until I started actually doing simple box breathing whenever I was feeling overwhelmed. I think that was I don't need to like just focus on getting the right medication. I have other things available.
What are some of the basic tools in your toolbox that you use on the regular?
So my regular tools that I go to, meditations is still an everyday, every morning thing. I worked up to a point where now meditating for 30 minutes or an hour is not an issue. It used to be like meditating for 30 seconds was a struggle. So it took a lot of practice and working at it, but meditation, a huge one. The breath work thing is always for my overwhelm, anxiety issues. Whenever I'm like out and I just need to calm down, I do that because that helps with my sensory issues. On the physical side, to do lists, I have to do it. Like in the morning, it's like almost a compulsion to write out a to-do list now. I even have right now, I have my pad next to my keyboard here. I have one over at the table where I have coffee in the morning. I have them in multiple places because if something pops into my head, I can write it down and get it done for the day. Because if I don't, it will go away. I also am very fond of journaling, but not like journaling, not a specific type of journaling. I use it as a recap of my triumphs of the day and what I did. I do that at the end of the day because it helps me recall the day. It will refresh the memory and get me through to, oh, yeah, I remember I did this today and I accomplished this today. And I felt great that I did that. On the flip side, in the morning, I also journal completely different. I just do stream of conscious journaling where I will just brain dump into a composition notebook just to get any negative thoughts out of my head and all the garbage basically so I can start my day. Another one, I use a lot of support groups online because it's always good to know that there's other people out there. It's one of my mottos is that you're not alone. And sometimes I have to remember that, hey, I'm not alone in this. And seeing other people talk about it helps too. I try to exercise regularly because it's one of those things that helps my mind think. If I'm doing strenuous activity, I can clearly think through something. It just works out that way for me.
All the things that you're talking about actually sound like things that everybody should be doing.
Yes. I tell people, I'm like, this works great for people that are neurodivergent, but hey, everyone should probably be doing these things because they do help you mentally and physically.
For sure. I know that when I have a big complex problem that I'm puzzling, if I take a walk or a run, I just think different. I think differently when I'm moving. That's really what struck me is that all of these tools that you're using, Trish and I talk about all the time to improve your overall wellness.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of not making it so it's only for neurodivergent people because there are a lot of tools that my wife uses a lot of these tools. She's not neurodivergent. I use these tools because I know they work for me. And I try to make that distinction. I even mention it in the book. I'm like, these are the tools that worked for me. And this is how I use them. Because a lot of people, a lot of neurotypical people will talk to somebody with ADHD and they will say just, oh, just meditate. Yeah, that's great if you can sit down and be present, but most people can't. They have to literally go through this nightmare of thoughts that are just constantly firing and they can't even focus on the the moment at hand. I tell people that, hey, I started out in an unconventional way that worked for me. That way was going through making a cup of coffee. Everyone would think, how is that meditating? I was like, it was. I would focus on getting the beans ready. I would boil water. I would, even if you just have a Keurig, just going through and getting the pot out, putting it in, putting your cup there, getting your fillers in like cream or sugar, whatever you use, and just being present with that cup of coffee. that is literally the definition of being mindful and present with that moment. It became a meditation practice. And from there, it just got bigger and bigger.
I think you bring up a lot of really good points. Someone who had struggled with anxiety felt like I very was reflected in your story where I thought everyone thought like this. I thought everyone was constantly thinking about something and couldn't shut off their brain. And very much like you, it was the breath work that actually helped to shift things.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a lot more common than people realize because I don't think it's talked about as much because there's so much noise and busyness in everyone's day. It does make you wonder if you took out the noise and the busyness, the music in the background, the music on the phone playing, the TV, even just hearing the noise of a city life. If you took that away for a moment, how would your brain function?
Yes. Yeah, I love that because what I used to think, because, oh, ADHD means I can multitask, and everyone can multitask, and people with ADHD are generally good at doing a lot of things at once. However, I noticed that what was happening is I would just keep adding more and more things and getting overwhelmed and start a million projects and get none of them done. I would figure out how to really walk through and get one thing done at a time, break it down into small chunks. Even what you just said about turning off the background noise, turning off the TV, just figuring out to break it down to just a simple moment. That's how I wrote my book. I had to make a ritual out of sitting down and finding what worked for me to not get distracted and not get pulled away. I learned that nonverbal music, like spa music, really great for me when I'm writing with music that has lyrics. Really bad for me because I start typing out the lyrics just subconsciously to start in the middle of my writing. I would find these little things and I'm just like, oh, I break it down to the bare minimum. I find, okay, I'll add in one thing at a time, kind of testing the waters. And that's really the best way to do it. Yeah.
I loved how you used the word ritual. For anyone who has not listened to our podcast episode with Ashley Dufresne, we've actually done two with her and we dive into rituals and how rituals change your frequency.
Mm.
But the other piece to the ritual is that intention that could help shift that frequency. I just wanted to mention that because you didn't say the word habit, you said the word ritual.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this is a conscious thought that you have created as part of your day.
Yeah. I use the word ritual a lot because the word habit always made me frustrated because I read that book, The Form a Habit in 21 Days. And I even put it in my book. I'm like, the average habit can take upwards of 9 months to form. When you actually put intention behind what you're doing and making it a ritual every day, like I said, that to-do list is a ritual that I have with my coffee. Every day I know I'm going to do that because that is the proponent that it just shoots me off into the day doing the positive work that I need to do. So it's creating rituals is so important to me.
We're laughing because Julie and I literally did a podcast episode before the New Year's, having this full conversation about how this 21 day to change a habit is not effective. It's not actually grounded in research at all, and how people are just so unprepared to make these changes. They're trying to change and make this subconscious habit when really you should be integrating it as a ritual first. And it does. It takes a good 6 months plus for it to really get ingrained into your body system. So that's why we were both laughing. We weren't laughing at you. We're laughing because, oh my gosh, you're singing our tune.
I'm with you on that. It is so important to be ritualistic instead of habitual. Even in the book, I used the word habit a few times, but I do mention that. I'm like, they did do that study on like the average time it takes to form a habit. And you're like, oh, okay, this book is really just like hoping and praying that 21 days it happens.
I was so big into habits, and I think the reason why learning the differentiation between habit and a ritual is that a habit is unconscious. And so to me, that sounds, oh, it should be easier. because I don't even have to think about it. It just happened. However, when you actually are trying to develop a new habit without that intention, it doesn't typically stick because it's so difficult to last the 9 to 12 months to make it a part of your subconscious where you're not thinking about it anymore.
Yeah, that is so true. It's one of those things where if you start down that road where you're like, "Oh, I want it to be a habit. I want it to be automatic." I'm like, "Do you actually want that though? Because I want to know that I'm doing it. I want to feel that I'm doing it. I don't want to just have it automatically done." Things that I like that are habits, brushing my teeth, taking a shower, that those made those habitual where I don't think about it, I just do it. But creating something, creating an art project, taking my camera out to go, I don't want that to be habitual. I want that to be a ritual for me. I want to go out and have this process and feel every step and understand what I'm creating and know that I'm doing this. So yeah, that's huge difference.
Yeah. And I think even with the meditative practices that you talk about, when you do them long enough, they could become habitual, but we need to consciously ensure that we're present when we're doing it. And I think I even talked to someone about this is that I've been meditating for so long. I'm in the middle of a 1,000-day meditation. I'm in the final 300 days of it. And I'm definitely to the point where I sit on my bed and I'm like, oh, it's time. And I start my practice. But I do have to make my sure I am consciously aligned with my intention for that practice. Because if not, my meditation exactly is just habitual. But then I'm missing the essence of it, the juice of it. I'm not getting that, I guess, as you would say, that dopamine little kick out of it. Because that's really the difference. It sounds like, especially if you're doing this for one that's neurodivergent. But even if you're neurotypical, you're missing that little dopamine hit that you're getting from implementing these healthy rituals.
Yeah, I think with meditation is a big one because for me, when I started out meditating, because I tried meditating on and off throughout the years because I was always interested in the benefits of it. But after the diagnosis, to get really into that space and that moment and be connected with that moment, I struggled so much until I didn't. I tell people that all the time, and it wasn't an overnight thing. But once I did, it became this thing where it was like, oh, when I'm there, I get that sort of dopamine hit, that dopamine release. It's because it's powerful, whether it is doing a myriad of meditations, whether it's a guided meditation, whether you're just doing something with like mala beads, where you're doing like a mantra meditation, whatever type works best for you. I always say go towards that. I I guide people towards a guided meditation first because sometimes, especially with neurodivergent tendencies, you might get off track. You might wander off the path. I always tell people you can always get back on the path, but it's better to have somebody to listen to sometimes. What happens, like even for me, that quick little meditation that might have been 2 minutes turns into something that might be 30 minutes. Or this last year, we went to an extended advanced meditation retreat with Dr. Joe Dispenza. It was a 5 hour meditation he does a pineal gland meditation. And I didn't think that I was capable of doing something for 5 hours, let alone meditating for 5 hours, but I was. And I did it, and it felt like a few minutes, which was still strange in itself. But I tell everyone, you can get there. It just takes practice.
To get off track a little bit, do you think that sleep has a big impact on how well your day goes? Is that a priority for you?
It should be a priority, but it sometimes falls by the wayside. Do I think it is a big proponent for everyone that is neurodivergent. Now, how much sleep people say, oh, you need your 8 hours of sleep. And that's great if you can get it. My body, it's always been this way. Once I hit a certain time, like it's generally between 6 to 7 hours, my body just wakes up. However, the quality of the sleep is what's important. How much deep sleep I'm getting, how much REM sleep I'm getting. That is the big proponent. That's why I wear these little health trackers like the Whoop band in my watch. They track this stuff, which you can fall down a rabbit hole with because you're like, great, I feel great. And it analyzes your information. You go like, oh, I slept like crap somehow, but I feel good. But that's the pitfall of those. But it's good to have an idea of, oh, I was in REM sleep for 2 hours. That's really good considering I only slept for 6. And I know people that sleep for 10 and only get an hour or less of REM sleep. So it's all about that ability to get quality sleep.
Do you try to go to sleep around the same time every day? Do you have a routine around that?
I try to go to sleep around the same time. Sometimes my brain just tells me no, and I have to listen to it. That's just something with how my brain, like, I have to dump all my energy out. If I go to bed at 9:30 and I go, all right, if I read a little or even do a meditation, I'll be asleep by 10. That'll be great. If I'm still laying there and things are still bouncing around in my head, I have to just go do it. If it's an idea that's bouncing around in there, I'll go to my computer, write it out. It's happened a few times where either blog posts or ideas for books or ideas for different projects will come up, and I'll just literally type them out and outline them. Once I get done, my brain's okay. Yeah, now we can go to sleep, even though it's an hour or 2 hours later than you wanted, but now you can. I try to keep it within a window of like, all right, I want to be in bed by between 9:30 and 10:30, so I can try to get as much sleep, much quality sleep as I can, but it doesn't always work.
If someone suspects just listening to a lot of things that you're talking about, I feel like, oh, I have some of those struggles, or I see some of those struggles in one of my sons or different family members. What would you recommend as to how to start down that path to discovery if you have a diagnosis, or should people just start implementing some of these strategies? What would you recommend?
I always recommend people implementing the strategies only because they help everyone. But I also recommend self assessment. And people go, oh, a self assessment. You can't do that. You need a doctor. I'm like, no, that's not getting a diagnosis. It's not self diagnosis. It's a self assessment. It's a checklist. There's 30 questions on it. You just go through and check it off, and you can actually just talk to your primary doctor and be like, hey, I took a self assessment. This is where I am. What can we do? Because sometimes what happens is they'll look into how are you sleeping? How is your diet? Do you exercise? Like, do you do these things? All right, let's try that first. But then sometimes you take a self assessment, like when I did, and he looked at it. He goes, you're relatively healthy. You exercise, you do all these things, but all these things are like a red flag. So let's go to the next step and talk to a psychiatrist about this and go down that route. So I always say implement the tools, but take the self assessment because it will start shedding some light onto, oh, maybe I need to look into this. Maybe I do have something, or maybe my child has something that might need further intervention, either medically or with therapy. So it's the self assessment is always a good place to start.
You have a self assessment tool that you recommend?
I need to just put one on my website that I use because there's a bunch out there. It's very easy to find. The one that I use was the one that my primary doctor gave me. It's free online, but he had it like printed out so you can do it in his office. But you'd be surprised. It's not it's not an in-depth or very like, oh, I have to give out personal information. It's just some general questions about how you approach things and how you feel. It's a good baseline, but I'm going to do what I do best, which is write down a note right now and put that up on my website.
It's been absolutely fabulous talking to you today. I feel like you've shed so much light on a topic that seemed a little elusive and did a great job of breaking it down into some, I hate to say simple, but I would say simple, not easy, but simple tools to help move someone along through the process. Would you like to share with our guests if they would like to learn more about you or learn more about the tools of neurodivergence? How can they contact you and get to learn more from you?
Yeah. First, I do want to say I always enjoy conversations like this because I do get to simplify things that are scary to talk about. It's a scary topic for a lot of people because there's such a stigma around it. The easiest ways to get in touch with me, I always point people to my websites. There's stefanglazer.com. It's first name, last name.com. And that is where like my blog is and a whole bunch of information, my social media and all that. Also, navigatingneurodivergence.org. That's where it's more focused on the book and podcast and soon to be the tool for the self-assessment. But yeah, those are the two places to really that you can find all my information there.
For those who would like to buy your book, is that on all different platforms that they can get that, or do they need to get that from your website as well?
That is available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And hopefully in the next month or two, I don't know the timeline because I'm doing it myself, but the audiobook is in the works.
Oh, exciting.
That's exciting. So we
Might as
can
well,
listen to the book in your voice.
yeah, I might
I
as
would
well put my ability to not just be an audio engineer, but have a voice to do an audiobook. So put it all together and put it out there on Audible. That's going to be fun.
That's exciting. Coming soon.
That's right.
And your podcast.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have a podcast, right?
Yeah,
So we
that's
can't
right.
forget that.
I can't forget that. Yeah, I always go, yeah, the podcast is there, but Navigating Neurodivergence with Stefan Glazer, that's me, of course. What it is, a project that used to be about a passion project, had a completely different name for the first 20 episodes. So anyone that listens to it, they're going to go, oh, I'll listen to the first episode. And they're going to be like, what is this? Because it used to just be called the Professional Amateur Podcast. The big turn happened when I started writing the book and I reassessed what the podcast was. Because everyone I talked to, they were all friends that had these passion projects and were getting things done through life. However, they were all neurodivergent. So at that point, I said, they're staying in here just on the old format, but going forward, I'm going to bring people on that have been navigating neurodivergence their whole life and are thriving. They have successful businesses, or they're just figuring it out. And that is important. I want their stories to be told. And that's what the podcast has been all about. And like I said, navigating neurodivergence, I have links to it on navigatingneurodivergence.org. And it's on every platform under the sun with video episodes on Spotify and YouTube, which has a delay. But Spotify is where I generally host them all.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us today and bringing some light to this topic.
Tricia, Julie, both of you, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. It's a wonderful conversation. Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend. Want to learn more about a specific topic? Drop us a line on our website and we can explore it deeper with you.